So lately, we've been talking a lot about cyber threats, right? And one name that just keeps popping up in the research is APT12.
Yeah, APT12. They're
They seem like
a pretty formidable adversary.
they do, they really do. So I think for this deep dive, we should really unpack who APT12 is, how they operate, what kind of damage they've done, what tools they use, and how to defend against them.
Sounds good.
Cut through all the noise and really try and understand this significant threat.
Absolutely. And one of the things to understand is APT12, it's not just a random collection of hackers, right? These guys are sophisticated. They're also known by a lot of different names. You might hear them referred to as IXESHE, DynCalc numbered, Panda, DNSCALC. And these aren't just different names for the same group. They often reflect different aspects of their operations or the specific tools they might be using in a particular campaign.
Okay, so let's get back to basics. Who is APT12? What do we need to know about them?
Well, APT12 is a cyber espionage group linked to China,
Okay.
and they're designated as Threat Group G00005 in the cybersecurity world.
G0005.
G005. And the APT part stands for Advanced Persistent Threat, and that tells us this isn't about quick smash and grab attacks. APT12 is in it for the long game. It's about achieving specific strategic objectives. They target a range of industries, media outlets, high-tech companies, government organizations.
So, Persis, we're not just talking about an annoyance here. We're talking about a dedicated effort to infiltrate and extract information from some pretty high-value targets.
Yeah, absolutely. They use advanced cyber exploitation techniques. They use spear phishing. They exploit vulnerabilities in software, including zero-day vulnerabilities. And they maintain a really complex command and control infrastructure to manage all their operations.
So they're organized, they're resourceful. Tell me a little bit about how they operate. What are some of the tactics and techniques they're known for?
Well, one of the techniques that's become kind of their signature is this thing called DNS calculation, which is tracked as T1568.003. And essentially what they're doing is manipulating parts of the IP address to dynamically determine which communication ports they're going to use for their command and control channels.
DNS calculation. That sounds pretty clever. What's the benefit of doing that?
The benefit is it's stealth. It's hard to detect. Traditional security systems monitor network traffic on specific ports, well-known ports that are used for various services. But with DNS calculation, APT12 can avoid these static port assignments. So instead of constantly, beaconing out on the same port, their communication pathway is constantly changing dynamically, which makes it much harder for traditional security measures that rely on port monitoring to detect their malicious activity.
Wow, so it's not just about hiding the message, it's about constantly changing the mailbox it's being sent to.
Exactly.
Okay, what other tricks do they have up their sleeve?
Another tactic they're highly proficient in is exploitation for client execution, tracked as T1203. And this basically involves targeting known vulnerabilities in common software, things like Microsoft Office, Adobe Reader Flash, these programs that pretty much everyone uses. And there are certain vulnerabilities that they've been known to exploit. And we track these with CVE numbers. So, for example, CVE 2009-3129, CVE 2012-0158, CVE 2009-4324, CVE 2011-0611. All of these are vulnerabilities that APT12 has historically targeted. So CVE numbers, those are like specific flaws that were discovered in these programs at a certain point in time. Exactly. And by focusing on these known weaknesses, they increase their chances of successfully gaining that initial foothold within a target system, right? So think of it as finding the path of least resistance.
So how do they get someone to open one of these malicious files in the first place?
Right. That's where spear phishing attachments come in. T1566.001, and this is really a cornerstone of their strategy.
Yeah.
They craft these highly targeted emails, often impersonating people or organizations that the recipient trusts, and these emails contain malicious attachments, typically weaponized Microsoft Office documents or PDFs. And these documents are designed to exploit those specific vulnerabilities that we were just talking about.
So it's that classic combination of, social engineering, tricking the user, and then a technical exploit to gain access once they interact with that malicious content.
Precisely. And once an unsuspecting user opens that infected attachment, it triggers what's known as user execution via malicious files, T1204002. And that's how the system becomes compromised.
It sounds almost simple when you explain it like this, but I imagine the skill involved in crafting these spear phishing emails, making them believable, and weaponizing those documents is pretty considerable.
Yeah, it takes a lot of expertise and planning.
Right, and their efforts to stay under the radar don't stop there, right?
No, they also use web services for C2, which is tracked as T1102.002. And this basically means they're leveraging legitimate web infrastructure, things like blogs or even WordPress sites, to either host their command and control servers or to blend their malicious communication traffic in with normal everyday internet activity.
So they're trying to make their traffic look like just someone browsing a blog or a website, so it's harder for network security to flag it as suspicious.
Exactly, hiding in plain sight.
So we have a good idea of how they operate, but let's talk about some specific attacks. What are some notable campaigns that have been attributed to APT12?
Well, one area they've consistently targeted is media outlets. There's a clear patterned activity aimed at monitoring and, in some cases, suppressing reporting on politically sensitive topics related to China. They've been linked to intrusions against journalists and news organizations all over the world.
That's concerning. That's not just about stealing data, that's potentially about controlling narratives and limiting the information that reaches the public.
Right, exactly. And beyond the media, they've also been involved in attacks targeting governments and the high-tech sector. And in these cases, the objectives are usually stealing intellectual property, gathering intelligence, and establishing persistent access to strategically important networks.
So, stealing intellectual property from a high-tech company that could give competitors a huge unfair advantage and stifle innovation, right?
Absolutely. And then getting into government networks, well, that can provide access to all sorts of sensitive information, which could impact national security.
And I understand that APT12 has also developed its own malware families, IXESHE, Riptide, HTRAN. Can you tell me a bit about those?
Yeah, so those are custom malware families that they've created for their operations. And they're not just off-the-shelf hacking tools. These are tailored to their specific needs.
Okay, so what are the general functions of these different malware families?
So in general, IXE is often used for that initial access,
Hmm.
getting a foothold within the target system. It can extract data. It can ensure persistence, meaning it can survive reboots and maintain its presence on the infected machine. Riptide is interesting because it uses encrypted communication channels, which makes it very difficult to detect and analyze its network traffic. And then HTRAN functions as a proxy tool, so it allows them to bounce their communications through multiple compromised systems, making it really hard to trace the attack back to the source.
Okay, so each of these tools plays a specific role in their overall attack strategy from, getting in to staying hidden to getting information out. Let's dive a little deeper into each of these malware families, starting with IXESHE. What can you tell me about that one?
Okay, so IXE is also known as 00015, and as I mentioned, it uses standard web protocols like HTTP and HTTPS for its command and control communications, which lets it blend in with normal web browsing activity. It's very versatile. It can execute commands or scripts on the infected machine. It can collect system information, and it can establish persistence using a variety of different methods.
So it's trying to fly under the radar by mimicking regular web traffic.
Yeah.
Okay. What about Riptide or 0003? You mentioned encryption earlier. What kind of encryption are we talking about?
So Riptide's defining feature is its use of strong encryption for all of its communications back to its command and control servers, and the specific type of encryption can vary. But the point is that this encryption makes it extremely difficult for network monitoring tools to understand and analyze the content of those communications. Even if you see the traffic, you can't easily determine what data is being exchanged or what commands are being sent.
Okay, so if you can't see what's being said, it's nearly impossible to know if something bad is happening. And finally, what about HTRAN or S0040, this proxy tool that you mentioned?
All right, so HTRAN acts as a network proxy, allowing APT12 to route their malicious traffic through a chain of multiple compromised computers before it reaches its final destination. And this makes it incredibly challenging to trace the attack back to the original source. It's all about creating distance and anonymity, making attribution very, very difficult.
It's amazing how much effort they put into covering their tracks. It really speaks to their level of skill and the resources that they have at their disposal. But let's get to the really important part. What can be done to defend against a threat like this?
Well, defending against an adversary like APT12 requires a multi-layered approach, right? You need multiple defenses working together. So first, and this might sound basic, but patch management is absolutely crucial. APT12 frequently exploits known vulnerabilities in software, so regularly updating your operating systems and applications is essential,
So closing those known holes, making it harder for them to get in.
right? And second, email security awareness training for all employees is paramount. Given that spear phishing is one of their primary methods, educating users on how to identify suspicious emails, avoid clicking on unknown links, handle attachments consciously, that can be incredibly effective.
So empowering your users to be that first line of defense.
Exactly. Third, you need robust network monitoring tools,
Hmm.
things like intrusion detection systems that can help identify unusual traffic patterns or connections to known bad infrastructure. These systems can provide early warnings of an intrusion.
So moving beyond just recognizing known threats to identifying potentially suspicious activity.
Right. And fourth, endpoint protection solutions on all your computers and devices are critical. These tools can detect and block the execution of malicious software, even if it manages to bypass those initial network defenses.
So that's the last line of defense on the individual machine itself.
Exactly. And then finally, and this requires a bit more of an organizational shift, adopting a zero trust architecture can greatly enhance security. And the core principle of zero trust is never trust, always verify.
Zero trust.
Zero trust. So it involves limiting user privileges and enforcing strong authentication for every access attempt. So even if an attacker gains initial access, their ability to move laterally within the network and cause further damage is severely limited.
So zero trust, it sounds like it's a fundamental rethinking of how you approach security.
It is. It moves away from that traditional model of trusting users and devices inside the network perimeter, and instead assumes that threats can come from anywhere, both inside and outside. And this is particularly effective against advanced persistent threats like APT12 because it reduces the inherent trust within an organization's digital environment.
So it's a combination of essential security practices like patching and user training, alongside more advanced approaches like zero trust that offers the best defense.
Absolutely. You need those multiple layers of defense to make it as difficult as possible for APT12 to achieve their objectives.
Well, this has been a fascinating and a little bit scary look into the world of APT12. It's clear that they're a serious threat that we need to take seriously.
Absolutely. They're persistent. They're constantly evolving. And it really highlights the importance of staying informed, adapting your defenses, and maintaining a strong security posture.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it really makes you think, we've discussed targeted spear phishing emails and software vulnerabilities. But what other seemingly ordinary online activities might these advanced actors be leveraging or exploiting in ways that we haven't even considered? It really highlights how interconnected our digital lives are and how even seemingly harmless interactions online could potentially be a door to something much more sinister. Something to keep in mind as we navigate this increasingly complex digital world.
Couldn't agree more.
Well, thanks for joining us today.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, stay safe out there.